Thanks, Giselle. Wonderful to be here. I think anybody who came here hopefully started off by taking a look at what Einstein was busy writing on his scribe down there, which I guess was about this meeting, energy, mass, and acceleration. Isn't that all that it's about? Well, I'm going to really focus on three things. One is, what is industry doing, not intentions and promises and what they might be doing. And I'll make the points that in advance, that for everything I put up, the scale, the impact, the intensity could certainly be increased. But this is the reality of today. Second, I'll highlight what are some adjacent activities we don't often think of as helping to drive the process. And finally, I'll ask the question, what is it that government could do to make the job of industry even easier and quicker? I think everybody in the obesity world knows this very well. The classic Susan Jebb and others obesity foresight report from almost a decade ago, highlighting the fact that obesity is a shared responsibility between many sectors, almost identical to Nico Pronk's opening words. The reality, though, is that true partnership between food companies and governments remains elusive. Part of the reason for this elusiveness I put up in a quote by Margaret Chan, not unlike many of her recent quotes, saying that many of the risk factors arise from behaviors of multinational companies. Who really governs the policies that shape our health? Governments make policies that are heavily influenced by corporate lobbies. I put that up not to have a discussion on whether it's technically right or wrong, but that isn't the way to start building partnerships, particularly at the head of a major global agency. And I think that the spirit of this meeting actually moves us to try and find where is the common ground, as opposed to where's the gap. So let's look at what food companies are doing to cut calories supplied to the US population. We know one of the biggest, might call them experiments, but mighty effort, was when 16 major food companies joined forces to say they were going to cut 1.5 trillion calories from the US diet. In fact, they achieved 6.4 trillion, and nobody expects you to believe this. That's why the fact that it was independently assessed by a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation-funded group of researchers led by Barry Popkin, not known to have the coziest support and belief in what everything that a food company does. The report is not entirely positive. It shows that there's substantial work still to be done, particularly among minorities, and particularly some concern about the sustainability of the endeavor. But the fact that it was published in a peer-reviewed journal based upon an independent review, I think is exactly the way we need to move ahead to start establishing trust. Don't trust, base it on verifiable independent data. Having seen the inside of this initiative from the beginning, I know it was an almighty effort to get 16 food companies to take action. Some of the reasons for this big calorie decline are the activities I'll highlight coming up now. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation would acknowledge that this represents an important contribution in cutting into the excess calories, particularly of young people, not the total amount required, and still a long way off, and there's still other parts of the food industry to be involved, but a very significant effort that we really need to study and see how we can build upon and accelerate. Obviously, a key component was the reformulation of beverages and foods, which are continuing across the country. I think the green is being used to show stevia, and it's interesting that we're seeing the combination of greening being associated with the environment and healthier options. I look into the audience, and apologies if your product lines are not out here, but I know that there's been a big shift in terms of the reformulation process. Again, this is not sufficient, this is not enough, but these are very large-scale investments based upon hundreds of millions of dollars of investment. They do represent a shift in where we need to go. Smaller portion sizes are introduced. I always thought that when Mayor Michael Bloomberg at the time announced the 16-ounce cap, it was obvious it was going to be fraught in the regulatory environment, and it was obvious it was going to get into a big bun fight between industry and choice and all of these things. But the fact is, it had a huge impact on industry, and this is the result. The result is that we're seeing an unstoppable trend towards smaller portion sizes across beverages, across snacks. And you might say, well, does that truly benefit the consumer? My sense is that this is a good example where the profit unit per smaller pack is slightly higher than on the larger pack, meaning that it actually works for the business. It works for the consumers, and the proof of that is that total volumes of higher calorie components are down while total profits continue to rise or remain steady. We have seen not only in terms of the actual products, but in terms of a range of voluntary partnerships that high-calorie snacks and beverages in schools and convenience stores have started to come down. This is both due to the efforts of the Partnership for Healthy America, but a range of others. The very first initiative to take sodas out of most of the schools in the US, we know, was brokered by President Clinton between the major beverage companies. I doubt it would have happened without him actually having them in a closed room and saying, instead of going after you negatively, let's have you do something positive, and let's see how you can take this action. That kind of focus on incentives has mattered and has actually taken calories out of the school supply. We know that the marketing of unhealthy products, there's still some products which I don't think should be marketed in the way they are. But again, the objective data, the independent assessment suggests we are starting to see a shift. It's probably not fast enough in terms of internet and internet-related sales, and many of the children-based entertainment programs. A lot more needs to be done. But again, it's an unstoppable trend. And finally, in this category, I think we've seen over the last decade and a half, the introduction of more nutrient-dense products being introduced into portfolios as opposed to purely energy-dense products. Again, the philosophy under these is that we're not trying to just reduce calories, but we're trying to improve the healthfulness of what is being consumed as well. And I put on the bottom here that government subsidies are still not aligned with these nutrition goals, something I'll come back to in a second. What we often forget is that this is not happening overnight. This is not happening in a vacuum. To do this, the food companies have been investing hundreds of millions of dollars in R&D and innovation. And I've always been interested in seeing what is the biggest determinant of a legacy company making progress on social and environmental causes. And whether it's an oil or gas company, or whether it's a transport company or a food company, if they say they're going to make change to reduce the environmental or social impact, don't believe them until you see the size of their R&D and innovation budget. If that is not going up, they cannot be innovating. And here's an interesting example that until many years ago, companies were not willing to talk about the size of their R&D budget. They were maybe fearful that investors would say it's unnecessary. Now they're proudly putting it in their reports. So just a few weeks ago, PepsiCo gave its figure on R&D at $750 million in the last financial year. A significant proportion of that is probably for reformulation to address the kind of things I spoke about, as well as the environmental aspects. We know that other companies have probably got substantially higher investments. The Nestle Research Center is a physical large research center, and Unilever similarly. I put these up to remind us that exactly the same time, when the government is seriously underinvesting in nutrition science, it's actually the private sector which is stepping up to the plate. I mentioned adjacent company actions are starting to see the light and move very fast. And I'll come back to the John Hancock Vitality Healthy Food Program. But basically, we have been pioneering the way in which people respond to discounts on healthy food. And we know that price is an important determinant. So if you lower price of healthy foods, consumption goes up. And our evidence from South African studies of over 300,000 people shows you can shift the diet quite significantly over time. When Tesco last year announced that it would take sweets and candies out of the checkout counter, the impact was fairly large, initially to the bottom line of the company. And in time, we understand that the young mothers with kids who would normally be fearful of going into a store to have the enormous pester power at the checkout counter happen, are faced with a far more pleasant environment, increasing sales. I mention it because this is the kind of initiative that hopefully retailers in the US will start taking. CVS was very quick to whip the tobacco out of the stores. Fantastic, and obviously I love that. But anybody been into a CVS and looked at the candy and sweets and just about every other store in the country? I'm unaware of any major retailer who's taken the effort to actually make the kind of changes Tesco have. And remember why they're making it. It's not just for the health reason. It's because the future of retail lies in automated counters when you check out. There's simply not going to be space in time to have these kind of things anyway. Why not do it early and send a signal to consumers that you're serious about health? I put down at the bottom the fact that the wearable revolution is also going to transform both the levels of activity that we see, but also the links between activity, healthy food, and nutrition. And this is a very fast-moving space with just a hint of what's to come. Just last week, we took over part of Grand Central with John Hancock. You might say, well, what's that got to do with this audience? Well, John Hancock is a major life insurer who actually are now saying that we should be promoting life. That's what life insurance is supposed to be, not just pay for you when you're dead. And to do that, we are activating you through a range of activities, but we also will give you now up to a 20-25% discount on healthy food on your life insurance policy. Why? Because we know it materially contributes to increasing your lifespan. You live longer, you pay us your premiums for longer, you get the life, we get the premiums, and we cut your life premiums as your health status goes up, so that you're paying less and you're getting more at the point of term. I think an extraordinary example of a win-win by a sector that we have never seen seriously engage in health. So let me just give a couple of comments about external reinforcement. Many of you may be aware that the Hudson Institute provided, I think, very good empirical evidence showing that the companies who are investing in healthier food are showing healthier prior profits. Unless the initiative is actually synergistic between profitability and health, it will continue to be a source of big distrust and complexity between the industry and government. Here's an example where the two come together. Secondly, we've seen a wide range of ways in which the financial analysts and those looking at the structure of companies and what they're selling are starting to ask, what is the obesogenic profile of a company? Which companies out there are actually starting to lower the obesogenic profile of their company to tackle obesity in material ways? This is a report on your one side, on your right, from Bank of America Merrill Lynch, who take a very hard-nosed financial perspective and outline in their report which of the companies, food, there might be sports and apparel, pharma, a range of other activity ones, who are contributing to obesity in a positive way, recognizing that many had to start far back. And they're saying these are the companies where you should place your investments for the long term, because that is going to be both in the best social interests of society, but it's where the future profits lie. And proof of that lies in one of the more recent analyst reports from RBS Capital Markets. So what they've looked at is they've teamed up with a group focusing on consumer demand in the health sector, asking the question, what drives a decision of which food service company you go to? So McDonald's versus Chipotle, for example. In the past, it used to be purely taste, convenience, and price. Those used to be virtually the only determinants, and the entire industry was built on that. There's a huge shift coming. The data is showing that particularly millennials now are driven by corporate citizenship, the healthiness of the food products, and the sustainability of the supply. A huge opportunity driven on the consumer side that is going to affect the food service companies in what they're going to provide, knowing that to remain profitable, they're going to have to upgrade to become more healthy. They're going to have to focus on the supply chain. And then finally, for every industry action, I believe that there's an opportunity for government to do even more to push this process ahead faster. Coming from a background in research and science, I put the NIH right up on the list. The NIH has for decades severely underinvested in nutrition science that matters for prevention and public health, severely. And the data we have, and we've published this, has taken a look at the grants programs of the NIH and published just what a small proportion of the NIH budget goes into true prevention. Why is this important? This is important because think about how we got statins. We got statins through the NIH subsidizing what was eventually the pharmaceutical companies' capabilities to build a platform of statins across the world. The result of that was that we now have medication-based solutions to nutrition. We don't have food-based ones. The same is true in terms of large-scale advocacy programs. We know that there was VERB and a whole lot of programs in the past that governments supported. CDC needs to get the right amount of funding, not just to focus on Zika and Ebola, but to focus on what is truly affecting the health of Americans today, large-scale investments in fruit, vegetable, and healthy food programs. If we saw those, industry would be able to collaborate in a way in which the actual products would be brought to the market. And finally, before this thing blows up, it's a strange light looking at me. I won't go into detail, but we all know that the underlying pinnings of what makes a food company's ability to innovate often tough is the high cost of the commodities that they have to use. It still remains a reality that it's far easier to use the highly subsidized products associated with corn, high fructose corn syrup, soy, and whatever, as opposed to innovating on the basis of fruits and vegetables and nuts and grains, where the subsidy structures are non-existent or extremely low. Shifting that or signaling a shift in that would have a big impact in what food companies could do. And then finally, it all boils down to who are the faces out there of actually driving the movement. And I think we have seen over the last few years a number of these people working in ways behind the scenes often, but working together in interesting ways that are driving the obesity agenda. I would hope that we would start seeing this happen to a far greater extent, and hopefully you all know who all these faces are. Thank you.